Welcome to Bespoken Bones with your host, Pavini Moray, connecting ancestors, sex, magic, and science. Pavini explores transpersonal tools for erotic wellness every new and full moon, engaging educators, healers, spiritual leaders, and scientists in revolutionary dialogue. Get ready to feel good and go deep. This is Bespoken Bones.
Hi, welcome to Bespoken Bones, ancestors at the crossroads of sex, magic, and science. We're in the business of healing trauma, connecting with our roots, and developing radiant erotic wellness in past, present, and future generations. I am your host, Dr. Pavini Moray, and it's my pleasure today to welcome Laura Levinson. Laura, they, them pronouns, is a movement artist, a healer, a deep believer in the power of communities to hold one another lovingly accountable through growth and change. Laura approaches accountability as a love practice and plant medicine as a form of ancestral remembering. Laura has been performing and creating work in Minneapolis, Minnesota for the past 6 years with Sammy Pfeffer, Wild Conspiracy, Marcus Young, Anicha Arts, Bare Bones Puppets, and a variety of other beloved collaborators. They are a 2019 recipient of an Artist Initiative grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board to produce Dumpster Fire, an evening of queer and trans performance at Franconia Sculpture Park. And they've trained with master herbalist Lisa Wolf. Their ongoing class, Gut, Bones, Ground, combines their research as an improvisation-based choreographer with their work as a politicized healer. Other ongoing projects include creative collaboration with Don't You Feel It Too, a practice founded by Marcus Young and stewarded by many others. Don't You Feel It Too centers artists, healer, activists in moving our brave, honest, loving, ridiculous, and resilient selves into public spaces. And I want to welcome you, Laura.
Thank you so much, Pavini. I'm delighted to be here. It's really nice to meet you.
I was so happy to meet you. And can you, I hear sounds of joy, and I just would love it if you would describe where you're sitting right now.
Okay, so I am sitting, actually, the first collaborator that you named, Sammy Pfeffer, is a dear, dear friend of mine. I'm sitting in their backyard. I asked for a quiet and healing space to be able to tap in and record this podcast with you. And obviously we want to do that in a way that is socially distanced and safe for ourselves and our communities. And so Sammy and their housemates have graciously allowed me to sit out back in their yard. And there is a friendly puppy dog out here with me. And there's a beautiful big tree. There's actually a couple of really beautiful big trees. There's a kiddo next door in the window who's just waving to me. There's birds. There's a lot of little, the little dropping like pre-blossoms and seedlings on the ground. There's a little leftover rain in my seat, so my butt's a little wet. Yeah, that's where I am.
That's great. I really just love the liveliness of it and wanted to let our listeners know that as well.
Yeah, and I wanted to thank you too for your flexibility. Yeah.
Oh, super happy about it. And I just wanted to invite you to pray us in.
Yes. So the prayer that I wrote this morning actually is very, 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 very similar to the one that you offered, Pavini, at the beginning of this call. So I will just amplify and reiterate and offer again. So benevolent spirits, we ask for humility and guidance to share what needs to be shared, especially when that is silence. We recognize that we are on wounded land, and we ask permission from the ancestors of this land, both human and non-human ancestors of this land, to do the work of healing and connection. We honor the many, many, many beings, living and no longer living, who have made it possible for the two of us to have this conversation today. And may we speak the truth as we know it, And may we also speak up when we do not know.
Thank you for that prayer, Laura. Yeah, so let's start with talking about your ancestors and hear a little bit about how you know them, how you relate with them, maybe a story about how they've made their presence known in your life.
So I will just say up front that I'm very new to this work in a lot of ways. And God, I would not be here having this conversation with you if it were not for Susan Raffo and Thea Lee and Resma Menachem. Um, Lady Speech Sankofa, who was one of the first people who taught me magic and read tarot for me. Like so many beings. I would not be in any sort of ancestral practice without their guidance and support. So just want to give some big ups to my living mentors also. Maybe I'll start by just saying a little bit about who my people are and where my people are from, and then I have some good stories that I'm excited to tell you. So my mother's people have been for, I think like 5 or 6 or 7 generations now on this particular land in the upper Midwest. My mother is from upstate Michigan, and I'm here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So similar region of this part of the world. Um, Her father, my grandfather's people, originally came from Germany. They came from Baden-Baden, Germany, which was kind of a hot spot for the witch burnings. And they have been on this land for several generations. My grandmother's people, we are less sure about. Her mother died in childbirth, and her father died in a construction accident when she was very, very young. And so she was the only girl. And so her brothers went to live with living relatives, and she was put up for foster care. And so she ended up with an adopted family. My mom and I just don't have as much information on her people because she had experienced the loss of her direct kin when she was very young. As far as we know, her people were from probably Ireland or Wales. I have always felt Ireland. My mom, I think, resonates with. There's a town in Wales, Conway, or a region in Wales with the same last name as my grandmother's birth name. So we both have our suspicions, and we haven't been able to find a ton of information. But that's my mother's people, and so in some ways, it's really an honor and a blessing for me to have made Minneapolis home for the last 6 years, and it really feels like an opportunity to do my work on this land that has sustained my mother's side of the family for so long. And so I feel a pretty deep level of commitment and responsibility to doing the work of healing on this land in particular, because it has hosted my ancestors and all of the hosted in all of the complicated ways that means, being from a people who are not indigenous to this land. So honoring the complications of that. And then my father's people are Jewish. So we've been in diaspora for a very, very, very long time. My grandmother came from Poland. I think she's one of the youngest siblings in her family. And so I think she was born stateside. Her family left Poland to come to New York. My grandfather, my dad's dad, his people are from the Odessa region of Ukraine. And again, because there's been that line of my family, my grandfather's family, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of abuse. We just don't have as much information about my grandfather's line. But my dad's mom, my bubby, we know that her people came from a small town in Poland called Przemysl, and some of my dad's cousins have made the journey there to go, check it out and see what they could see what they could feel. Some of the information that I have about that place is that there is now, or at the time of my dad's cousin, writing about his experiences, there was one Jew left in that town. So gosh, yeah, just like I'm really feeling into all of the complicated histories of what it is for my people to have fled Europe, and brought their unresolved pain and their protection of life, all of that. They brought all of that to this land. And my dad's parents ended up leaving New York when my dad was very young and moving across the country to the Bay Area. And so my dad's people are now in Oakland, and Berkeley, where I think is close to where you are, Pavini. Is that right?
Um, at moments, that is right. Not at this particular moment, but yes.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, that's really helpful. And I'd love to invite you to share a story from your people.
Yes, I would love to share. So the first story, one of my favorite stories to tell about my ancestors, or sort of my relationship in learning to converse with them. Um, so, gosh, must have been like 4 or 5 years ago. To kind of paint the picture, set the scene. So 4 or 5 years ago, I had just quit kind of my last quote unquote like real day job, and was about to dive into a like 2 or 3 month long intensive artistic process. I don't know if you're familiar with Bare Bones Puppets, but it's a show that happens around Halloween to honor the dead in Minneapolis every year. And this was my first sort of like toe into that, to the puppet community, which I was coming from um, a much more trained dance and dance company kind of background, and working arts admin for a dance company, and all of a sudden like fell down this wormhole and was in cardboard anarchy land. um, which have become some of my favorite people in my community, and some of my most dear friends here. So I was just getting into that world. It was right before Trump was about to be elected. Um, you could feel it. Like it, I think a lot of artists and creatives and magic makers, it's like we were really feeling the ground shake. Like something was going on. And my grandfather, my mother's father, Ivan, had just died. Um, and I was walking by the river. I was like spending a lot of time just kind of rambling aimlessly, or wherever. And I was walking by the Mississippi River, and this was before I had done any of my formal herbalist training. I couldn't ID wild plants for crap. I like didn't know shit about shit yet. And so I was wandering by the river, and all of a sudden I looked down, and there was this plant that, like, I can't describe it in any other way other than it was like it was speaking to me. And I didn't know what it was. I had never really noticed it before. I had no particular reason to notice it now. I mean, it wasn't like it was brightly flowering or like super exciting, but it was like, pick me, know me. And so I picked a little piece, and it like smelled super aromatic. I was like, what is this? And I carried it around for a few days. Um, and eventually I was like asking around again in this, in the Bare Bones community, like as we're working on this show, and it was like somebody, I'm in the right group of people, like somebody in this group of people knows what this plant is. And so eventually somebody was like, oh, that's wormwood. And I was like, oh, okay. I don't know what that means, but cool. So, I tried, they were like, oh, don't fuck around with plants you don't know. Like, maybe don't eat or drink it if you're not sure if it is for you. And I was like, well, I just make tea out of it, like just to see. And so had sort of this ongoing relationship with this plant. And now I have had a longer term relationship with Artemisia plants, which is like wormwood and mugwort. And so there's a lot more I could say about it now. But in that moment, it really did feel like a gift from my grandfather, who had just passed, and who was kind of, was the first person when I was a kid to like walk me through the woods and point things out and be like, that's milkweed. Do you see that deer over there? So yeah, in that moment. And again, like really before I had developed any sort of conscious ancestry practice or conscious herbalism practice, I really, really felt my grandfather in that moment. So that's one.
Can I interject
Yeah,
something
please.
that I think you'll find delightful? Uh, so this morning, before we're having this conversation, it's a gorgeous day where I am, and I'm planting in my new garden, and I planted wormwood this
Ah,
morning.
yay. Oh, that brings me such joy.
Thanks for that story, and would love to, if you have more, if you want to share,
Yeah.
please share
Well,
more.
so the second story I was going to tell you is I think you asked like in whatever forum I filled out kind of before we were talking, like I think it was framed as can you share a story? Can you share one of the stories of how you know your ancestors are real? And I was like, oh yes, I can answer that question. um, and so this story takes place when I was in my process of research for Dumpster Fire. So Dumpster Fire was a collaborative process. There were 7 of us total, and the way the show worked is that each of us kind of brought our own autonomous work. We devised a collaborative beginning and sort of a ritual end with the audience too. And then in the middle, we each looped our own piece for an hour. And so I was in my own rehearsal process, doing research for Dumpster Fire, doing movement research. And a few months before that, I had been in the same studio. I was renting a movement studio space. And I had been in the same studio with a couple of friends, and we were working from Resma Menachem's book, My Grandmother's Hands. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but it's a good,
Yeah, I
yeah,
am.
okay, right on. Figured as much. So we were working from My Grandmother's Hands, and we were doing a little bit of the ancestor practices in that book. Um, and some of the friends who I was with who had, at that point, I think it's safe to say, more of a magic practice than I did and more of an ancestry practice than I did. We had sort of spent like 20, 30 minutes in individual meditation and movement, and then we would talk, we would share back. And, you know, my friends are telling these like amazing stories of having like had visions of their Sicilian ancestors, like with an egg and this incredible healing ritual. And I was like, I got nothing. Like all I got, and this is interesting to me in retrospect. I was like, all I got was pain. All I got was this sense of actually through my Jewish lineage of like, you know, you're queer or you're not quite one of us or you're of mixed heritage or whatever it is. Or even now I would interpret it as like, it would be easier uh, if we didn't have to feel this pain. It was sort of like all of this pain through my Jewish ancestral side of like, we're not sure that we're glad you're here. We're not sure that we're glad you exist. And of course, that's not the only story in that side of my ancestry. But there's a lot of pain there. And so I was like, when will I get the beautiful visions? Like, where are my well ancestors? And so fast forward to a couple months later, I was in my research process for Dumpster Fire, and kind of what I was starting with, which is really similar to my gut, bones, ground work now, was this process of trying to figure out how to get back to the earth. And so kind of my starting question was like, you know, when am I on my knees? Either I'm grieving or I'm fucking, or I guess, or maybe or I'm getting a haircut. Apparently, my partner shaved my head for the first time the other night, and they were like, "I can't see the top of your head. Can you please get on your knees?" I was like, "Yes, I can." So anyway, so I was working with these questions in rehearsal. I had some music on, and as I was moving, I just kind of went, "Okay, whoever, if someone is available to come assist." If I think specifically I asked for a queer ancestor. I said, if there's a queer ancestor who's available to come and assist, you are welcome in this room. This was before I had done any excavation of my own body as genderqueer. That, like, you know, I was still using she, her pronouns, all that. And what somebody, like a very clear somebody, came through. And I just had this image of this, like, this is going to sound so funny, this like sailor dude, this like blonde, sweet, gay ass sailor dude, who was like, yeah, I want to come dance with you. And we had this dance for like 20 minutes. You know, he was like, come, I'll show you where the dance halls are. Like, we could even be lovers if you want to. Like, it was pretty profound. And I had never had any experience like that. You know, since then there have been a couple of other times where I've really, um, have felt the presence of, you know, whoever else was available to come and assist me, or come dance with me or whatever. But that was the first time that I was like, what the fuck just happened? And it, looking back on it, it feels really good to know that that kind of support went into the creation of that piece, of that show. Yeah, that's what I got.
Yeah, thank you. It is a beautiful practice when we can move with our ancestors. And yeah, I know that space, and I know the space of being the dance for them, and like the sense of like, this is what I've got for you,
Totally.
right? Like, this I am the prayer. This moving body is the prayer.
Yes.
And uh let me be the fruition of your dreams, right, through this dance. And yeah, it's really
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh my God. And they're so clear about what music they do and don't want to listen to. Like, there was another time when I was dancing in a cemetery and one of my favorite songs came on, and I just got this gut feeling like, you know, whoever was with me was like, we don't want to listen to that. Change the
right.
song.
Yeah. I mean, and it's kind of like a no-brainer, right? But listening to music in the languages
Yes.
that they spoke, or the traditional folk music of those
Yeah.
places that they're from, like it opens doors.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Mhm. Yeah. I wonder if you'd speak a little bit more about movement, in particular. How does moving our bodies, uh, how is that political? Like, how is
Mm,
that, if you are an activist, uh, and you dream a different world, you know, how does movement fit into that? Why is it important?
mm-hmm. Thanks for that question. Oh my God, there are so many ways I could answer. I think starting from the core of my own self, like, movement has been the way that I know to save my own life. Like, period, the end. You know, as a kid, as an adult, as a young adult who was kind of told, like, you know, you don't have the body or the technical prowess or whatever to quote unquote be a professional dancer. Um, and I was kind of like, well, I need to stay alive, so I'm going to keep dancing. Thanks. Thanks anyway. Um, and I won't go into too much of my own journey in that direction. I don't think it needs to be shared or explained right now. But God, I guess part of what I want to amplify is my relationship to Don't You Feel It Too as a community of practice. And maybe I'll just share a little bit about how the story of that practice and how that practice came to be.
Sure, that sounds great.
And I think that will in part answer the question you asked. So Don't You Feel It Too began in 2008. It was when the Republican National Convention was happening in the Twin Cities. Um, I was not in Minneapolis at that time, so this is a story that has been handed down to me by Marcus Young, who is the founder of this practice and a mentor and a beloved friend. And Marcus and a handful of other people, including I think Ananya Chatterjee and Teresa Mattis, and I think Aki Shibata, like, joined toward the beginning. So just want to name some names of folks who were there. And this was at a time during the convention when the city was on pretty scary level of like militarized lockdown. I mean, we're talking policing riot gear, fenced off areas, people experiencing homelessness were being pretty severely targeted, in the sort of in the way that political conventions do, right? When they're like, clean up the streets, make everything, kill the life, make everything look shiny. And it was intense. And so Marcus and Ananya and this group of dancers um, came together, and they wanted a way to really to move through their bodies what was happening in a way that didn't necessarily look like a traditional protest, partly because I don't want to put words in their mouths, but looking back on that time, I imagine that that kind of protest wasn't always safe. Certainly, it's dangerous to put our bodies on the line that way, and depending on who we are and what kind of a body we're in this lifetime, that can be really dangerous. So they were looking for a way to protest that didn't quite look like a protest, that also would allow the fear and the anger and the grief and whatever else needed to move. And also at that time, I think like iPod was getting really big. And there were those. Did you remember those iPod commercials with like kind of silhouetted people just dancing with their earbuds?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So they were like, well, okay, what if we, it's kind of like the commercial, like what if we just use our iPods and we just jam out to our own music and let's see what happens. And so now now it's a really central sort of tenet of this practice to be moving in public space together. But at the time, like the very first time, it was really scary to do that. And so they started off inside a room, like inside a dance studio. And then, very slowly and kind of watching each other's backs, they tried going out into the hallway. And then they tried taking it out onto the street. And they originally, when the practice started, there were minders. There was like half of the group dancing and half of the group just watching their back. Because you never know, like how, you never know whose pain you are going to encounter when you are dancing your liberated body on the street. So all of that brings me to, the practice today, like it's been 12 years now. And the instructions for this practice have been boiled down to just 10 words. And they are love your music. And music, I think, can be pretty broadly interpreted. It doesn't have to be auditory music, although most often we use our own sort of pocket music and headphones. The second instruction is move honestly, which is a lifelong practice, as many of us know. And then the last instruction is feel what you feel, which is also a lifelong practice. And so, yeah, I think the story of Don't You Feel It Too is kind of one way that I can paint the picture of how I understand dance and movement to be a really important piece of the puzzle of resistance. And one of the things that Marcus has said of this practice, which I really love, is that we are using our bodies to liberate our bodies. So it's sort of like, we can't control everything about our environment. We certainly can't control everything about the level of oppression around us. But we can work with the tools that we have in our own bodies. And we have a lot of tools. So it's using the body to liberate the body. And nobody ever said that was easy, and nobody ever said that it was always safe. But I think that's what we're doing, and we as an organization, as a practice, are in are about to have a really interesting, exciting conversation with some of our beloved colleagues who are more in the like dance company world. We're much more on the sort of like improvisation we look from the outside like a silent disco or like a lot of other recognizable things. And like, certainly we don't you feel it too does not have a monopoly on the power of dancing in the streets, and the power of dancing together in public to our own sound or our own rhythm. But we're excited to have this conversation with some of our colleagues who are in a more formalized dance company, because they're just different kinds of training. And I think both of them certainly can be, improvisation as much as really rigorous technique and form can both be training for the revolution. They're just different kinds of training. So let me stop there.
Yeah, I want to ask you more about that because I want to ask you if you would speak to the way you weave eros into improvisation. Like where are those things threaded together? Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good question.
And I guess I could also ask you the vice versa question, which is where is improvisation woven into
Oh my
eros,
God,
right?
totally.
Yeah. Okay, maybe we'll do one then the other, or whatever your magic tells you, just go that way.
Well, God, what's coming up is like, I was having this conversation with one of my dear friends and improv teachers, Arwen Wilder, who is half of the dance duo Hijack here. We were having this conversation, and I was like, Arwen, up until COVID, was taking weekly contact improv classes with Arwen and her collaborator, Kristen Van Loon. And I was like, Arwen, I have gotten so much better at sex since taking your class. And she was like, well, you know what? Like one of the, I think she was talking about Nancy Stark Smith, who was one of the, who is in the lineage of contact improv. I think she was like, a lot of these exercises that we share, like they were developed because this mentor of mine was tired of having bad sex. And so a lot of the work that we do in that class around like boundaries and speaking up and asking for the kind of touch that we want and being in charge of our own dance and, empowering ourselves to like remove ourselves or leave a dance that we are not getting anything out of, or empowering ourselves to change the conditions of a dance, and also really learning to listen on a really deep level to the other bodies that we are having a dance with. Like that, I would say that class in particular is like creeping more and more into my sex life in a way where they sort of feel inextricable, and that feels really beautiful to me. And as far as, gosh, eros in Don't You Feel It Too is sort of a whole other ball game, because it depends on, for me, and this, we all have different experiences of our bodies in public space and how our bodies are read and received in public space. And for me, it depends on what kind of public space I'm in. Sometimes I'm doing Don't You Feel It Too, like alone by the river. There's no one else around. And I'm really like turning up the Kate Bush and like screaming my heart out and like stomping on the ground and, like really having a body. um, and sometimes I'm on a street corner and and my music makes me want to move my hips, and I'm not sure whether that feels safe or honest to me in that moment or not. And it's just sort of, again, it's a dance. Like it's this ongoing dance of what wants to move in my body. What kind of love can I give that part that wants to move just by noticing that it wants to move? And then what is my sort of like risk level assessment of this moment? Is it safe to move in that way? Could I test the waters and see whether the feeling of fear is more internal than actually an external threat? If I move a certain way, like, if I get into an interaction that I don't want to be in, whether it's somebody, whether if I'm dancing on the street and I'm moving my body a certain way and somebody's like, "Ooh, do that for me in the bedroom," whatever it is, where I'm like, no. um, Don't You Feel It Too also has provided me with a lot of opportunities to learn how to dance out of an interaction that I don't want to be happening. and contact improv too, actually. Like I really have learned, it's kind of it's like the kind of tools where you're like, okay, I don't want to be picked up, so how can I make my body heavy? Or I don't want to be I don't feel comfortable with you grabbing me there, and so how can I like send my energy the other direction to remove that limb from your reach? Or I don't really want to be having a conversation with you right now because I'm in my practice. I'm dancing on the street, but it doesn't mean that I want to talk to you. And sometimes it's nice to have a conversation with passersby on the street who are like, wow, what are you doing? What's going on? Sometimes that's delightful. And other times, especially if it feels objectifying, or, if somebody's like taking a picture or a video right in my face that if they feel entitled, if there's some sort of entitlement going on, that I'm like, I don't think so. It really has become a practice for me to learn how to dance out of that interaction, and to sometimes, and don't you feel it too, if we're dancing together, we also can sort of dance each other out of interactions that we sense are unwanted, whether it's kind of like through putting my body closer to my friend's body, or whatever it is. And I'm realizing just as I'm talking, like I think you asked me about eros and dance, and so like so much of what I'm saying to you by way of answering is about boundaries, and like how dance has really supported me to have boundaries and to feel in my body that I can have them, and that I can, if I feel secure in my ability to keep myself safe, then I can feel secure in my access to pleasure. So thanks for that question.
Yeah, that totally makes a lot of sense. And I think that like the other thing that I'm hearing here is the way like exactly what you said at the end, the way that boundaries, like having a container means that we can feel more free, right? That there's a way that our boundaries allow us the freedom of our pleasure. I was thinking of I was in the Peace Corps in the early 90s in Bulgaria, which is a really
Mm,
racist country. At least when I was
mm,
there, it was like racism was really blatant,
mm-hmm,
and no one felt any compunction about saying racist things wherever.
mm-hmm,
And one of my colleagues and dear friends is Korean. And just I mean, the amount of blatant racism that she would
mm-hmm,
experience, and like people would just come up and take her picture,
mm-hmm,
and it was infuriating to us, to her friends, of, how do we keep
mm-hmm,
her safe? So like we tried a lot of different things, but like a lot of them arose from spontaneous movement. One of them being like we were on a train together, and this man came into our train car and took a picture of her, and it's kind of like a compartment, like we're 6 seats, and he came in, he took a picture of him, he left, and so um, a couple of us like went and found his train car, his compartment, and took pictures of him. And in the moment, like it just felt like anger. But like when I was listening to you talk, I was like, oh, it was also erotic, right? It
mm-hmm,
was also like this like reclamation of power
mm-hmm,
of, okay, you're going to turn your gaze and objectify in this way. Well, who says we can't do that?
mm-hmm.
Right. And
Totally.
and I just remember like the look on his face when we did it. He was so astounded. It
Huh.
was like, he wasn't like, he didn't even know what to do with that,
Yeah.
of like, cause it had just never occurred to him that the script could be flipped like that.
Yeah.
Right. And like, what is the eros of that, of just like really and I hear that in your practice. Don't you feel it too, of like really getting in there and, taking back the power of the streets by creating, art and inviting others to, uh, be participants and be also audience, and like have to interact with it in some way, and like in by that enlivening of the public space, there is a call to eros, because you're like, this, and this is a sensual space,
Mm,
and this is a sensual
mm-hmm.
space, right? And this parking lot outside of Safeway is a sensual
Totally.
space, and I am claiming it, right? I'm saying it is, and so now you have to figure out how you're going to engage your
Yeah.
boundaries with
Yep.
that too, because like I'm calling you into an erotic
Yeah.
encounter, basically. Right?
Yes. Totally. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah,
I'm curious, do
really
you
great.
know Rosa Daniel Lang Levitsky? She's based in New York.
No. No, I
Oh,
don't.
okay. I'm like, that's another person I should have sent you her name, or I'll ask her if that's okay. But so Rosa has done a lot of work specifically with movement and dance as a protest tactic, and so she's working more in like the traditional realm of protest. And like a lot of her experience in that research comes through the Dyke March in New York and like other queer and trans organizing that's happened there. She came to do some work with Don't You Feel It Too last spring, like exactly a year ago almost, right around May Day. And I just remember one of the exercises we did with her was this practice of, it was kind of like, okay, how do we, um, how could you, let's practice like holding the line, like in a protest, you know, what are some ways to hold a line? We're familiar probably with like linking arms, or whatever else you would do to make it harder for usually the police to remove one of you, or harder for you to be separated from each other, or harder for somebody, again usually the police, to get through the line. And we did this exercise of holding the line, and the one side would hold the line, the other side would try and get through, and like people were like going under legs, and it was like fun and creative, and then at a certain point, Rosa just said, "Okay, so now for the people holding the line, now hold the line, but move your hips continuously. Like just keep moving your hips. I don't care how, just move your hips." And it was so much harder for people to get through the line because I don't even need to say because, period, the end. Like that practice of sensuality or whatever you want to, I don't even need to put words on that. Like whatever that practice is for you of connecting to your pelvis and moving your damn hips makes the line of resistance harder to break. Um, so that was another story that just came to mind that I wanted to share.
Yeah, that is great. It's like I love this idea of erotic play as resistance, right? Because in our activism we can get so serious,
Yeah.
right? It can just be like we are
Yeah.
activists and this is a big deal, big important work. And it is big deal important work, but it's like there's something irresistible about the pull of the erotic, right? Like when we weave in wiggling our hips, of being like, oh yeah, and like we're not locked down, we're not rigid, we're fluid, we're moving with the eros through our body. It just makes it so much more enjoyable. And like, try policing that. Try policing enjoyment. It's just if somebody is savoring and enjoying, and they're like, oh, I'm so in my erotic hip roll. I mean,
Yes, yes, yes. Sorry, you're gonna hear a plane going overhead probably. That one I can't move away from.
I'm definitely hearing it right now. Yeah. So yeah, we're heading towards the end. I just want to see if there's anything. What else feels important to? Is there anything else right now that feels important to make sure is in the interview?
But I'm just feeling myself wanting to offer something to this moment that we are in. You know, it is not a secret. I think to anyone, whatever level of denial they may be in, on some level, we all can feel the heaviness of collapse that is happening in our world in so many ways right now. And I just like a lot right alongside everything that we've been talking about with the erotic and like the ungovernability of pleasure and of our bodies, of our alive, raucously alive, messy bodies. Right up alongside that right now is death, is a lot, a lot, a lot of death. And there is no, it is not fair who is being taken from us now and who has the resources internally and externally to survive. It is not fair. And so I'm really wanting to just uplift both the celebration of the protection of life and, for anybody who's listening to this interview, like, you are alive, and that that's cause for celebration. Like that's amazing. You are alive, and your alive self is fucking amazing. And God, there's so much grief. Holy shit, there's so much grief. And there are so many of us in this moment who I think are really channeling not just the grief of our own lives in whatever level of collapse they may be in, but God, there's so many of us who really are have dedicated our lives and our work to protecting life, whether that is through healing or through activism or through art or, you know, whatever it is. It can really be through any medium. However we have dedicated ourselves to protecting life, we could not protect the people who are the people and the, you know, other than human kin who are dying right now. And just speaking for myself, like, I feel so fucking sad about that, you know, and like, even on the ancestral level, you know, as I'm learning to develop my own spiritual boundaries and work with my well ancestors. And, you know, somebody advised me recently to, you know, not to let everyone just work their pain through you, which was really good advice. But, you know, there's a part of me that wants to be like, yeah, come on, everyone who needs, every ancestor who needs something, like, get on board. And I can't do that because my human body will not survive if I do that. But damn, I want to be like, yeah, I wish you well. Come, like, you know, come along. Um, you know, so many of us wish that we could carry a lot more lives than our own right now. And I just really want to honor the grief, the like sinkhole of grief that is right up alongside all of the ways that we've been talking about life.
Yeah, I mean, I just find that capacity for grief, when we embrace that, right? When we get fluent with allowing grief to move through us, like, it is, I don't know, for me, it's a deeply erotic sensation. Like, those things are commingled, right? That there's like that level of deep feeling, that sensitivity, that nuance of sensation and emotion. And, like, grief is fused with aliveness. Like, if you're not in your aliveness, it's like grief becomes depression. It's not grief anymore, right? And when you're actively in your aliveness, grief is, you know, it just is something that moves through your body. Yeah. And it can be very, at least in my experience, can be really connecting with the divine. You know, it can really, like, it's a transcendent, like, if I allow, especially when I'm dancing, throw myself into grief, just allow those floodgates of grief to open, like, the sense of presence and not aloneness is quite profound. Yeah. In those moments. So thanks for that share and listening deeply. And, I just want to ask you to just say a bit about, how people can get in touch with you, and also, the projects that you're involved with. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So folks can feel free to find me on Instagram. My handle is worst puns pending. It's like an honest look at me. There's always a worse pun where that one came from. Just like it sounds, on Instagram, worst puns pending. You can, I feel comfortable with folks emailing me. If you want to send me an email, go for it. It's just Laura, Laura dot Levinson, Levinson 99 at gmail.com. And man, there's a lot of projects shifting right now in these strange times that we all find ourselves in. So, I am working on a trio with two other collaborators that is probably ongoing work that we will be in for the next year or so. We were going to do it as part of a festival on the solstice in June, and that festival got canceled, or at least postponed till next year. And so we're going to do a smaller version of that project. Supported by a micro grant from Forecast Public Art. And the other thing that I am offering right now is I'm still trying to figure out some way of offering my Gut Bones Ground class. And I said class in quotes, because because obviously we can't really gather in person right now. But so what I am shifting towards instead is offering that practice, which largely is a practice of listening to our bodies, listening to plants, and trying to remember that we are connected to the earth, trying to make our way somatically back down, to move the energy down into the ground. So that's really what that class is in its core. And I am offering it in a one-on-one format for now. And folks can get in touch with me if that feels interesting to you. Is very like, let's design together. What do you need? What plants are you interested in? Is there something specific in the way of grief or connection or apology or something else that you feel I can help you, that I can support you in, that plants might support you in, that movement can support you in? And then my other, a ton of my energy and my time right now is going to Don't You Feel It Too. And we have a modified public practice that is a home-based practice that we're offering right now. And we have some other community events that will happen probably virtually. There's a BIPOC event for Black, Indigenous, and people of color that will probably that Marcus Young is stewarding along with some other folks, and that may be an ongoing offering. So I would say folks can just check our website for whatever we've got coming up. It's a nice and easy one. It's just dyfit.org.
Great. And I did check it out before we met, and it just looks like an amazing practice. And I know that y'all are, of course, pivoting around COVID just like everybody else is. And it seems like that there's ways for people across the world to be able to participate.
Yeah, totally. We're really delighted to see faces from places other than Minnesota. So that's been fun.
Yeah, that's super great. Laura, I just really want to thank you for coming on Bespoken Bones and just, sharing and talking about your practice and being willing to be vulnerable. I just really appreciate your time.
Geez, back at you, Pavini. This was like such a happenstance connection. I'm really glad to be here with you.
And I just want to thank everybody who's listening to this episode of Bespoken Bones. I've been speaking with Laura Levinson in Minnesota, and you can check her out on Instagram. It says her, but I thought your pronoun was them, right?
Yeah, but well.
Check them out on Instagram. Okay, sorry about that. At worst puns pending. You did say that. But just check Laura out and follow them on Instagram. And also you can follow us on Instagram, Bespoken Bones Podcast. And if it's helpful, please reach out. We find out about new awesome guests to have on the show through your recommendations, who you want to hear be on the show. So, really feel free to reach out on bespokenbones.com. and send us your lists, your dream lists of who you'd like to hear on the show. And just wanting to wish everyone a safe and pleasurable time right now. And I'm Dr. Pavini Moray. This is Bespoken Bones Podcast, and we'll be back every full and new moon with more embodied goodness and ancestral wisdom.